Hello and welcome to Through Lucy's Lens. I'm Lucy, social historian and your very nosy friend. If you haven't met me before, I am a social historian, so I'm interested in the history of people, not politics. And when I was making my video about the back-to-backs, which was published last week, I found out about another kind of housing. I knew about it, but I felt like I needed to know more and bring it to you. And that is about the cellar dwellers of Victorian England. People who literally lived in the cellar of buildings because they couldn't afford anywhere else to live. And I became fixated in learning more about them. So I've spent the last week, every evening, spare bit of time I've had in the records to bring this video to you. So I'm not anywhere this week. I'm in my own home. This is just my introduction. So enjoy learning about these cellar dwellers. I think it's important that we remember them. And I'll see you on the other side. So welcome to Victorian England. In the shadow of Victorian England's industrial landscape, beneath the towering mills and the factories, and of course the grand terraces, a hidden world existed. It was a world of darkness, dampness, and to be honest with you, desperation. These were the homes of the cellar dwellers, the poorest families who lived not just below the poverty line, but quite literally beneath the streets. Today I want to talk about their lives, who they were, how they lived, and I think it's a very interesting but forgotten story of England's underground population. As Britain industrialised in the 19th century, cities like Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds and Birmingham swelled with rural migrants seeking work in factories and workshops. Housing demand exploded, but affordable homes were scarce. Landlords quickly and cheaply put up rows of houses, most in the style of the back-to-back housing you've seen in some of my previous videos. Some families, however, couldn't afford the rent of a full home, so unscrupulous landlords and sometimes even the tenants of the houses themselves converted cellars of existing homes into makeshift dwellings. In Manchester alone, the 1841 census recorded over 6,000 families living in cellars. These were not purpose-built homes. They were storage spaces, coal cellars and basements, hastily adapted with minimal consideration for ventilation, sanitation or human dignity. In 1854, over 16,000 people in Manchester lived in more than 4,600 cellar dwellings. 6 years later, occupancy of cellars like this had rose to over 17,000. They were often subdivided cellars with unsafe fireplaces and sewage-contaminated walls. Journalist Angus Reach visited the Angel Meadow area of Manchester in 1847 and described candlelit vaults filled with families and even livestock, the air thick with damp. In a pamphlet called Low Life Deeps, James Greenwood wrote in 1881, St Giles in London had families living in basement vaults accessed through pavement gaps. Children and adults slept on bare boards with airless, squalid conditions. Greenwood testified that the authorities considered it legal for residents to occupy these cellars during the day, even if they had to relocate somewhere else at night. This was, of course, a cruel loophole in the policy. In 1847, the Liverpool Mercury described how no less than 35,000 people were housed in cellars. That was almost 40% of the entire population of the city. Many were recent immigrants from Ireland fleeing the potato famine in their home country. A cellar on Lace Street in the city that only measured 14 feet long, 10 feet wide and 6 feet high housed 12 people. Another cellar housed 37 people, and in one case an infant was born and a mother was confined of twins. They were surrounded by human bodies deceased from typhus in close quarters. Smallpox broke out on this street and carried off 381 children. followed by an epidemic of measles that added 378 people to the total. In Leigh Street in 1847, 472 people died from fever during that year. Conditions in the cellars, as you can imagine, were appalling. The cellars were damp, dark, and only accessible by steep, slippy stone steps leading from the street. Many of the cellars lacked proper drainage. In wet weather, water would seep through the walls and floors, flooding the living spaces. Raw sewage would often flood the area after heavy rain, which in the north of England is a regular occurrence. A report from the Manchester Statistical Society in 1838 described a family of 8 living in a single-room cellar, barely 10 feet square. Their only light came from a small window at street level, the light restricted from the grime of the street above. Their only heat source was a fire grate, and that was if they could afford the coal. In 1842, Edwin Chadwick's famous report on the sanitary condition of the labouring population of Great Britain highlighted cellars as hotbeds of disease. Cholera, typhoid and TB thrived in these conditions. I've been looking at the census records, and they've revealed to me that cellar dwellers were not idle or unwilling to work. In fact, I don't think I've come up with one record where the person wasn't working. Many were weavers, washerwomen, labourers or factory hands. The fact was their wages simply couldn't stretch to better accommodation. In Manchester, it was common for entire families to work from their cellar homes, piecing together garments or assembling small goods piecemeal for extra money. During my search, I found countless and, of course, heartbreaking stories of those who lived in these conditions. One account published in 1850 describes a woman named Mary Sullivan, who lived with her 5 children in a cellar in Ancoats, Manchester. Mary worked as a laundress, taking in washing from local households. Despite her efforts, her income was so low that her family often went without meals, and 2 of her children passed away from illnesses that were exacerbated by the damp environment. I did, however, find stories of resilience. In Leeds, a man named Thomas Bradley was a cobbler. He managed to establish a small workshop in his cellar. Despite the hardships of his living environment, he gained a reputation for quality work, and eventually this allowed him to move him and his family above ground. Sanitation in cellar homes, of course, was virtually non-existent. Many cellars had open drains running past their doors. Toilet facilities were shared with multiple households and were often situated in poorly maintained courtyards already overused by the occupants of the full households above. During cholera outbreaks, cellar dwellers were disproportionately affected. Dr. John Snow's work in mapping cholera cases in the 1850s found that cellar homes with their contaminated water sources and lack of ventilation were critical in the spread of the disease. Public outcry grew in the mid-19th century, and social reformers like Lord Shaftesbury and health commissioners called for action. The 1848 Public Health Act granted local authorities the power to close the cellar homes. By the 1860s and 1870s, enforcement had increased. Cities like Manchester began to condemn cellar dwellings. However, progress was slow, and by 1861 there were still over 2,500 families living in cellars in Manchester alone. Legislation improved, and by the late 19th century, cellar habitation had significantly declined, though remnants persisted well into the 20th century in the poorest district of the largest industrial cities like Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham and London. Obviously, this isn't the happiest video I've ever made, but social history is about remembering all people, even the ones who at the time didn't have a voice. I don't think the cellar dwellers of Victorian England were passive victims. I think they were survivors, workers and families doing their utmost in conditions we can scarcely imagine today. I think their stories deserve remembrance, which is why I wanted to make this video. By shedding light on their lives, however hard they were, I feel we honour their endurance and remind ourselves of the human cost of industrial progress. You may, when searching the census records of your own ancestors, come across the word cellar at the start of their address. If you do, be proud of them. Thank you for joining me today. As always, you are so appreciated. If you enjoy social history with a little bit of travel and exploring as I continue to tick off my social historian's bucket list, please consider subscribing. It really helps me to continue to bring my passion for the history of real people and the storytelling to life. Until next week, goodbye.